Hello and welcome to this video where I'm going to talk about correlation of dynamic values in WebLOAD. All right, so in this video I will explain to you what is correlation of dynamic values at all and how you can write it manually without the engine, but then how can you use the WebLOAD correlation engine to have rules and advanced rules, and then I'm going to deep dive into advanced troubleshooting techniques. So before I go into deep details, I'm just going to give you a brief overview. So dynamic value correlation is all the things that we record in our script but are actually changing dynamically later. These can be things like a session ID, authentication token, order IDs, all those things. Those are dynamic values. That's what we mean by dynamic value correlation. And again, before I'm going to again go into the details, I'll just tell you the quick things. If you don't want to watch the whole video, what you need to do in WebLOAD in order to solve it. So follow those three things: correlate specific value, correlate and discover, correlate specific value, and email us. All right, so let's see it. All right, so this is WebLOAD. That's what I have some pre-recorded recording here. So if you have a script that you want to deal with correlation value, the first thing you should do is just use correlate and discover rules. This would fire the engine to look into everything that you're sending and receiving and try to find if it can automatically detect rules. You can see here it found a few different values that are changing or can be extracted. This one doesn't look like it's dynamic. This one actually does look like it's dynamic, and that one isn't. So you can select whichever you think is relevant, click OK, and WebLOAD would make the correlation for you. All right, that's step number one. Another option you have is correlate specific value. If you see that there is some value here that you think is dynamic, you can select it and do correlate specific value, or from here, correlate for specific value. And now that's going to give WebLOAD a specific value to look for, and let the engine find it for you and try to create a rule for you. All right, and when you run it, again, WebLOAD will look at everywhere that it can find and see if it can do something. And this would either create a rule for you, or like in this example, it would say here, search value not found. So this value I was thinking is dynamic, it's nowhere to be found. Or it can tell you, yes, I found it, but not in a previous response, or maybe it's not dynamic, or I don't know, it will give you some hint about what to do next. All right, so we did correlate and discover rules, and we did correlate specific value, still didn't work. My next best option for you is to just email us. Send us an email, support@value.com, and send us the script, and we would help you. We would give you hints over where to look, what the problem might be. All right, so that's if you don't have time, that's probably what I would suggest you to do. And now I'm going to go into a deeper level and deep dive if you do want to learn a little bit more about what is dynamic values and how to replace them. So the first thing I'm going to show you is an example of what is dynamic correlation and how it does not apply only to WebLOAD. It applies to all load testing tools and actually all testings in general. Everything that replicates a protocol, a conversation would have that. So I'm going to show you just an example in a bookstore. So this is a person trying to make an order. He says, hi, I want to make an order. The seller will tell it, all right, your order number is 100. And then the person would say, all right, add book to order 100. And the order is okay, the book was added, all right? So this is like a conversation protocol between a buyer and a seller. And now I'm gonna try to teach a robot to do the same thing. So the robot is gonna try to mimic what the human just did. So the robot would say, hi, I want to make an order. And the seller would say, all right, you have an order, but now the order is 200. The robot would say, add book to order 100, and the order would fail because order 100 is not found. And the reason is that the robot is just blindly repeating what it used to say before, but actually there is in one of the conversation, the order number was actually dynamic. So we need to correlate it, basically get it from a previous place and use it in a new place. So let's see how we can fix the robot to do that. All right, so our robot would start the same, would make the same request or say the same statement. The seller would say, all right, your order number is 300. And now the robot would have some kind of an extract logic. It would need to somehow know how to read off the response and get the value that is now, we know that is going to be different. So that's going to be an extract rule or extract logic. And now the robot would need in its reply or its next request, it would need to use that dynamic value. So we call that apply. So now in this step, instead of saying your order number is 100, it would say add book to order number, and which would be dynamic every time. And now the conversation is successful, the book was added. All right, so now let's move from the theoretical way. Let's look at it how it looks like in real life HTTP in WebLOAD. So I have here a recording with a bunch of requests in it, and I can see here that there's a value that looks dynamic or strange. I didn't enter it, so I want to try to see where it's coming from. So the first very useful tool for debugging these kind of things and in general is the find all option. So find all will look for this value anywhere it can find it. So if it's in the script or in the headers or in the body of the request, anywhere it can find it. So let's look at find. All right, and we found it in a couple of places. The second place that it appears is actually this place where we are at, but the first place is actually before that. So we can see that we're in ID 6, but actually it was in ID 4, which is the one above us. Yeah, ID 4. So that's where this value exists. So I'm going to double click it and it's going to take me here. So somewhere in the previous response, that value actually existed. So that's the classic correlation. The server sends us some value and then later we repeat it. We need to extract that value from here and apply, that is replace the value here with the value that we just got. All right. So first I'm going to show you the completely manual hard way to do it. Never do it really in real life. WebLOAD would almost always would do, there's always a better way, either by completely automating it or with search for a specific value or with writing a rule, but you'll almost never do what I'm just about to do. But let's do it anyway. So that value is here. I need to find some logic to extract it. The extraction logic really depends on where is this value and how it can be. So we can look at prefix suffix. So for example, we can look at what's before and what's after. This one specifically is a specific input, has a specific name and ID, or a name. So we can grab it by the name. If it's XML, maybe we have an XML rule. If it's JSON, we can do JSON. But let's for now just do a prefix suffix rule. So I'm going to copy the value or the context where the value existed. I'm going to go back to my script. All right, so I need to grab a value that has this thing before it, that's the prefix, and then it has the value, and then it has that part after it, which is the suffix. So in WebLOAD, we have this extract value function that takes a prefix, so which is this part, and the suffix. So let's take the prefix and the suffix. All right. Now, because my strings, both prefix and suffix, they had quotes inside them, so I can't, the string is already has its quote terminated. So every time I have quotes inside the value, I need to escape it with a slash. So I'm going to do this. So all these quotes, I'm going to escape. And then also this is a quote. So now we have the prefix and suffix, and I want to grab it from document WL source, which is the content of the HTML. That's the content of the response. Now, because I'm doing that, I also need to tell the agent to give me the response. So that saves source equals true. All right. So now I have an expression that would extract the value. I'm going to do session ID equals. All right. And just for us to see it, I'm going to do also debug message session ID. So it's going to print out what the value was. So that's my extract logic. And now I need to do an apply logic. So instead of the value here, I'm going to use session ID. All right. So now let's see what happens if I run it. All right, so we can see here that this is the message. So it has a new value. It used to be something B69, now it's something else, ACA. So now it's a new dynamic value. And also we can see that login is okay. So that's the manual way of, that's basically the manual way of solving correlation. Okay, so manually solving correlation works, but is tedious and hard. And every time you have a new script, you need to rethink and redo it. So that's not a good option. A better option is to use the correlation rules. So correlation rules is basically an example for the engine where to extract the value from, and the engine will automatically find the right places to extract it and also the right places to apply it. All right, so let's see how we add a manual rule to the correlation engine. So I'm going to go to the correlation rules editor from here, and I'm going to add a new group. That's just a grouping of the rules together, and I'm going to create a new rule. And there are various different rule types. I'm going to go into deeper level later, but for now, let's just use the all body text, which is the simple prefix suffix way, just like I did manually. I'm just going to put here the context that we did. So that was where the value we had before. We want to extract this value. So kind of the same thing. We had the prefix, which is everything before the value. And we had the suffix, which is whatever we had after the value. All right, we don't need to escape it here. That would be escaped automatically. Next, we have the prefix instance. So this is which, let's say we have the same prefix and suffix in several places, which one to bring. So one is the first occurrence. We can do two or third, the second or third occurrence or whatever. We can go backwards. So like the last occurrence would be -1 or second from last. Or we can even do 0, which the engine would try to look for all the different options and would pick the right one. So if the one that matched was actually the 6th occurrence, that's what it's going to do. For now, I'll just give it 1. Minimum and maximum length can be safeguards to see that the rule doesn't go crazy. If we know that the rules are like around 200 characters or maybe 200 or whatever, we can put here like a number. But if it's 2000, maybe we don't need that rule. So it's probably grabbing the wrong stuff. So that's a safeguard for how the rule fires. And also correlate exact matches and field name correlate exact matches means that it would, for example, if the rule we expect it to be the whole thing, then check this correlate exact matches. If you know that it can be just part of the string, then uncheck it. Again, this prevents the rule to just replace in unwanted places. And the same thing for field name. We can say if we know that the field name, this extraction rule only applies when the field name is session ID, then we can type it here, and then the value will only be replaced in that context. And if the same value is seen anywhere else, it would not. Again, depending on your situation, if you have a value which is actually used in many different places, then just don't enter the field name. All right, so now we have a rule, and let's run it. When you run, you can use correlate and discover rule, which will use all your existing rules, plus it would try to automatically discover new ones, or correlate script, which is just use your rules. And the way we normally recommend doing it is when you have a new system, you can do correlate and discover. It would find all kind of rules, which you can make permanent and add your own. And then if you're using the same system over and over again, you're re-recording and you already have all the rules that you want, then you can just do correlate script. It would just look for everything you have, use it, and be done with it. But if you're in the discovery mode, then you can do correlate and discover. So you can see this is my correlate and discover. My rule fired. So this is my active rule. It found the value, and it found here a bunch of other values here. If I like them, I can make them as a permanent rule, or don't use them. So I can do that. All right, let's click OK. All right, so now the correlation engine made some changes to the script. If you look at it, it's pretty much like the manual correlation that I did. So we have here the extract logic with the prefix and suffix, and we have the apply logic. Now the syntax here is slightly different. Instead of like a straight assumption, instead of a straight assignment of this equals that, which is what I did before. So instead of doing that and then using that value here, You can see that it's using functions, set correlation value and get correlation value. For all matters, it's pretty much the same as assignment. The only difference is the function add a little bit checks. So for example, the function already gets the previous value that had in recording and can give you some hints. When it's running, it would tell you hints like the value never changed, or it did change, or it never existed. So that's why we have those functions instead of assignment. But logically, you can think of it just like assignment. Putting this value here and the apply would just get the value and replace and use it there. So that's how you can use correlation rule. All right, next I'm going to talk about the other rule types that we have that can be used in more advanced situations. All right, back in my correlation rules editor, we have here all these different rule types. All body text, we've seen, those are the simple prefix suffix type of rules. Extract from header, as the name suggests, is going to extract value from an HTTP header. So if you have some custom header that has a session ID, or the other common thing is a location header. So if that's a redirection and the redirection itself has some dynamic value, then the header would be location, or it's like maybe X, Y, ID. And then you can also have a prefix suffix into it. Like in this example, if you have a location and then the value itself is within some context, then you can use prefix suffix just like in extract from body. Form field values is a common thing. If your value is actually a regular HTML form value, like actually my example was with a name and ID. So you can say use that name or ID instead. So that's a little bit more robust instead of using the prefix suffix. Maybe the page, it moves a little bit, but it still is the same element. So you can say look for the element with ID or name session ID. So that's form field values. I'm going to jump about those two and talk about them later. Searching cookies would look for value replacement in a specific cookie name. Now it's important to say that cookies are kind of a predefined protocol for correlation. So the server can say set cookie session ID, and then we're expected to send that cookie ID later, which is basically correlation. But that is a known protocol, then that you don't need to worry about it. If you have a cookie that is being sent in the server and then later repeated, the engine would completely handle it. You wouldn't even see it in the script. So the engine would automatically know to grab cookies and send them off as cookies. This advanced type happens when the value is coming from a cookie, but then used somewhere else. Let's say there is some JSON afterwards that has the same cookie value. Then you can say, find a cookie that's called my session and then grab the value off of it and use it anywhere else it may appear. All right. Search in XML can be if you need to look a specific XML tag, the value is coming from that. So instead of, again, using prefix suffix, you can use search in XML type. For more complicated XML ones, you have an XPath type of report. So XPath is a expression language to talk about items within an XML. So for example, look for a book inside a bookstore or something. So it's quite powerful language that can grab specific values. We have a similar thing for JSON. So JSPath is a similar type of expression language that can say, look for something which is an order that has a status new and grab the ID of that order. So again, doing it with prefix suffix is something sometimes not as robust or as possible. So those advanced rules are useful for those situations. And also there is a regular expression. A regular expression, they can also be better if for example, if the prefix or suffix is dynamic, but you know that the prefix is something, but then the last suffix is 4 digits, then you can express that in a regular expression and use brackets parentheses to say what value to extract. And then we also have user-defined rules. So you can write any JavaScript expression. This can be kind of a few JavaScript commands clubbed together, or you can write a function and put like a custom function that knows how to extract value from some custom protocol, then that's a very powerful tool to have. So those are the different correlation options you have. Now we have two other things that the correlation knows how to do. They're not really correlation, but I'll want to talk about them too. So replace by value and replace with expression. So replace with expression would just replace any field that you tell it blindly with the expression. So this is useful, for example, if your field name is timestamp. So there is a timestamp, it keeps changing every time, but it's not really correlation. The value is not coming from the server. The client every time sends a new timestamp. So you can say to the engine, every time you see the field name timestamp, just replace it with this expression. So you can have here an expression that generates timestamp, and that would be replaced with expression. And replace with the value is similar, but instead of relying on the field name, it relies on the value to replace. So you can say every time you find a value, so and so, replace it with an expression, some random number. And that can be a regular expression. So you can say every time you see a 10-digit number, so replace it with the expression, again, can be calculate a random number. All right, so those are the different advanced rules that we have. All right, now let's talk about troubleshooting correlation. So you understand how to do it, but it doesn't work. Let's talk about what you can do to find issues with correlation. So before I go into the correlation specific tips, let's just do general troubleshooting kind of 101 of WebLOAD. So I'm just running my script here and let it run, see what it does. So you see the test runs along and it says test passed. So we have requests, we have responses. Does that mean that the test did exactly what I wanted? Well, not always. And let me explain. So we're iterating the responses. We're looking for the responses for the server. If the server would fail in some dramatic way, like the server can respond with HTTP 500 or something like that, telling us that there was a problem. And this would become an error and you will see it. But sometimes the errors are more subtle. The server is responding, but not with what we wanted. And all right, so I'm going to inspect the pages and look. I'm going to do side-by-side view, and I'm going to look at the responses. And you can see, yeah, they look quite similar, but this one isn't quite okay. You see the recording said login okay, but this one says sorry, but an error has occurred. All right, so we have a couple of problems here. First of all, we didn't trap the error. We think that the test succeeded and it didn't. That's subject for a different video all about response validation. But just in general, this would happen because the server just sent us, just like the regular page was HTTP 200 OK, the server decided to do HTTP 200 OK with that, even though it actually failed. So this is a logical failure, but it's not a technical error. So that's what it looks. It's quite common. And again, the solution you need to do is you need to add validation points at certain points to know that we're getting the right place. And another useful technique I want to show you, instead of going one by one on all the replaces, is to use compare all. So compare all will look at all the requests that we had in playback and compare them to what we had in recording, and we'll show you what's going on with them. So for example, this one is completely green. It's completely identical. If I'm going to do compare, yeah, we would see that the files are identical. So those files, whatever I had recorded, I got the exact same thing later. Now the second one, I see that it's not identical, it's slightly different. All right, so I'm going to do again. I see that it was identical up to here, but here it's different. We can do compare HTML to see the differences. You can see that it's mostly the same, but it's different. Here you might guess that's our session ID, so it's not a problem. Now the page is different, and it's pretty common for things to change. Maybe you have some timestamps, maybe you have other things that change. The page is slightly different, so it's not usually a big problem if it's a little bit different. If it's too different, usually it means that maybe something is wrong. why is now the server is responding with something else. So that's going to be a good place to start looking for the problems. You can see that our next response is actually quite different already, and we can also compare it, and we see that there is kind of bigger differences here. You might be lucky to to kind of see, you know, what's happening here. It says login page okay, and here it didn't. And we can also use the sometimes the page view to kind of help us navigate. So that was just in general how we look at issues, and not necessarily with correlation. And actually, this is specifically a problem with correlation, because why did this fail? And we can look at the script and try to see, or the request, to see what failed, and we can try to see what do we think here that could have caused it. And you can spot here that there is this something that look dynamic looking, and now we can think, so maybe it is a correlation problem. The correlation problem is that we didn't have a correlation here. So anytime we see a request that's failing and has something that may change, we should ask ourselves, hey, where is this value coming from? Why is it still static? Maybe it's changed, and maybe that's what's causing our issue. All right. To demonstrate this next step, I'm going to go back to correlate specific values, just to refresher of that. So let's say I think that the value, the dynamic value, is just this part. All right. So I can do correlate specific value. All right, as you can see, the engine tells me a new rule was created for the value I set for. Yay, so this is my value and this is my rule. If I like it, I can make it a permanent rule, so it would be in my list, and that's great. And you can see here where it was found, also the context, so it was something that has WebLOAD MP store, and then that was the suffix. That's already a warning sign. That doesn't look like a good suffix to have, but let's leave it for now. And also you can see that the engine actually found a better rule with everything, but I'm gonna not use it also for now. All right, so let's say that's what we want to have, and let's use that. So now we have the correlation value. It's extracting this prefix and suffix, and it's gonna do this replacement. So let's run it and see what happens. All right, so now we can see that we have this warning, could not extract correlation value. All right, so that's kind of the most common warning that people see regarding correlation. Now let's see what happens. If you double click on it, it would take you to where it is. Now troubleshooting correlation is actually not that hard. There's no rocket science in it. So this rule basically says extract something that has this prefix and that suffix. So let's try to see where is it. So let's go. I'm gonna go to object in tree. Let's do compare HTML. All right. So I'm gonna find it here. Yeah. All right. So that's my value, and if I'm gonna find it uh, there, it won't find it. So that value that I thought is gonna be the suffix just doesn't exist in the response. All right. So that's a classic correlation failure. So again, to troubleshooting, you need to ask yourself, why does the prefix and suffix is not there anymore? All right, so it can be like I had here. I just used something too dynamic. The context is just not good. So I need to find maybe a smarter rule. Maybe I need to have a regular expression rule. Maybe I need to do something else with it. And the other common thing that happened is that this page is completely different. All right, it doesn't even have the session ID. It looks completely different. And that's usually either because that all request failed or a previous request failed. So actually a good recommendation for you is not to start looking for troubles from the where you had the first error, just in general, correlation or otherwise, but to compare all and look from, instead of going bottom up, going up bottom, and look for the first place where you have issues. And the first request that looks completely different, that may be the one that is failing, and you need to go back to it and see what's wrong with it. Maybe that's where the problem is. So if you fix the previous one, everything else now starts falling into place, and you'll have a good replacement. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you liked it. And remember, if you need any help, don't stress too much about it. Just email us at support@radview.com and we'll help you. Bye bye.